right, Lisa, as you find your seat, you don't mind if I call the meeting to order. Please note the board, hold on one. The board convened an executive session to consider matters regarding proposed, pending, or current litigation, the employment, promotion of a particular person or persons, and collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law, the Taylor Law. And with that, I would ask folks to please rise, and we will say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome. I don't know if today or yesterday was the last day of summer, but here we are. We're in the school year and into the autumn. We would like to start by asking for a motion on approval of the minutes for our meeting of September 8th. Is there a motion?
Motion.
I heard a second as well. Any comments, discussion? All in favor? Aye. And Dr. Zublionis, report of you.
Good evening, everyone. It's been a great couple of weeks since our last meeting. Dr. Smythe, Mr. Pappas, and myself have been in our buildings, and we've been able to see our teachers and students doing amazing work, including a lot of walking trips in our elementary schools and field trips in our other schools. As we near October, believe it or not, the energy in our buildings remains high. We've had a great opening, and I want to thank everyone for that, our families as well. Have really continued to focus on in this more normal of a school year on what makes us, personal attention, innovation, and positive relationships. You're going to begin to see a lot of communication about homecoming, which I'm very excited about, on October 8th. And we actually do not have another board meeting until after homecoming, so it's coming up. It begins on Friday, October 7th, with Vikings night games from different sports. Our Saturday day events on the 8th will include K through 12 sports clinics with our varsity athletes helping our younger students, our carnival from 10 to 1 p.m., our pregame fan fest at 1 p.m., our Vikings football game against Clark at 2 p.m., and our halftime alumni and halftime Hall of Fame photos, and then a Hall of Fame ceremony after the game at 5 p.m. So we're really excited for that. I want to thank Rachel Bowen for all of her help, all of our parent organizations, and of course, Ms. Shelley Newman for all of your help with organizing and communicating this. Thank you, Shelley. We have an action-packed weekend for our Vikings athletes again, in every sport: soccer, men's and women's, tennis, volleyball, field hockey, and of course, football tomorrow night at Seaford. We wish you all good luck, and go Vikings go. Believe it or not, on the arts, fine and performing arts side, we're getting ready for our fall theater performance on November 18th and 19th. Inherit the Wind. We're really excited. Students are already rehearsing and getting ready. So thank you to our maskers and Mr. Braitman for all the work that you're doing. And also, I know Mr. Chilemi there at the middle school helps as well. So thank you. We've had some great parent events over the last couple of weeks, and we'll have some more in the next few weeks. We had a great financial aid night on Tuesday, and we had a parent university the week before led by Dr. Titone. We'll be posting these presentations and the slide decks from them in case you couldn't make it. Also, Mr. Doherty will be leading his annual senior college night next Wednesday on the 28th at 7 p.m. It will be in the high school theater, and it's him doing an overview of the college application process. It's not just for parents of seniors. I would encourage even parents of freshmen, sophomores, and juniors to go and learn if you have any questions. And Mr. Doherty is a great resource, as are the counselors. We've also been having colleges visiting during the day, admissions reps. So we're helping our older students get ready for some of them for their next steps. On October 6th, we have a parent university entitled Kindergarten and New Elementary Parents Helping Your Children Learn to Read. And this is led by Deborah Small, our Director of Elementary Humanities, and some of our elementary teachers. They do a great job talking about the beginning of the reading process, everything from phonics to whole language literacy, everything you need to know to support your younger children at home. And we're really excited about this. Ms. Small's been doing this for a few years now. It's been very successful. So I encourage our elementary parents to go. And we have our last of our back to school nights next Thursday night, the 29th at 7 p.m. We're excited for that as well. I just want to mention a couple other notes before we move on with the meeting. First of all, there have been some issues with board docs and the meeting agenda. Sometimes it will default to different times when we make changes to the agenda. I just wanted everybody to know we're aware of that. If anybody has any issue at all seeing the meeting agenda 24 hours before, please contact me or Ms. Campy directly, and we will help you. Sometimes it is an issue on the other end, but we're aware of it, and we are working with board docs to resolve any of those issues. So thank you. On the financial note, we've been sending out some communication about LIPA and the impact of the settlement with Nassau County. We are still awaiting, Mr. Pappas and I, every day, like it's a holiday morning, the base proportions from Nassau County. We really want to know that information so we can provide that to you and see if and how much of a tax shift there might be from the LIPA settlement. Once we receive that information, we'll communicate it directly to you. We'll also be sending out more information about our tax exemption workshops that Nassau County is sponsoring. We're working on trying to get one here locally, but in the absence of that, they are all over Nassau County, and so we're going to be sending out more information on that. As we talked about in our summer meetings, and we'll continue to talk about, there are many tools we'll be using to mitigate any kind of further tax shift to the community. And one of those will be discussed tonight, the capital reserve process, which is a way of addressing facility needs over the long term in a way that prevents spikes in budgeting at a time when we need to clearly be going in the other direction with our budgeting process, which we will be. So we look forward to that presentation in just a few minutes. And I want to thank Mr. Pappas in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Z. We'll now move on to a special hearing on a use of the repair reserve. So I will read through this, but I will go quickly. My speed reading here. We have. Do I have to take a motion to open the hearing, or? Okay. Well, I'll describe it, and then I will declare that it is open and what that means. But there is a 5-day requirement for notification for the following notice, which was posted in the newspapers on September 14th, today being the 22nd, the Glen Cove Record Pilot and the Seacliff Glen Head Herald Gazette, which is that the Board of Education will be holding this hearing tonight for the purpose of discussing the following board resolution. Whereas the Board of Education of the North Shore Central School District has determined that it is in the best interest of the district to appropriate existing funds from the district repair reserve for the purpose of undertaking repairs and remediation work necessary to repair and restore the North Shore High School roof to safe operating condition, roof repairs. And it will be hereby resolved, the Board of Ed of North Shore authorizes the following appropriations from the repair reserve to fund the aforementioned repair and remediation work, an amount not to exceed $84,528 for the purpose of funding the roof repairs. And we authorize and direct the superintendent and or his designee to undertake the necessary steps to effectuate and undertake the aforementioned repair work in accordance with this resolution, including the execution of contracts for public work and or the purchase of supplies, material, or equipment in connection therewith. At this point, this is the opportunity. This is not regular public comment, which will be coming up shortly, but this is an opportunity for trustees and or members of the public who would like to address any aspect of the usage of this repair work to ask a question and or speak. See Mosca.
Thank you. Jamie, I think this is for you. I thought perhaps this is a pretty basic question, but I'm hopeful that it will educate everybody in the room. Can you give us a quick overview of the circumstances under which we desire to, choose to, must use money from the repair reserves as opposed to any other alternatives for funding a project like this?
Absolutely. The repair reserve is set up, and it's to be used for one-time, non-recurring repairs. If it was an emergency, we could use the repair reserve without a public hearing, but then the money would have to be returned within 2 years from the time that it was used. If it's not an emergency and we can hold a public hearing and go through the process that we're going through tonight, then the money does not have to be returned. But when these non-recurring expenses like the issue with the roof come up, if it wasn't budgeted for in the current year's budget, using the repair reserve helps us as we prepare our finances throughout the year. We do have codes within the regular budget for health and safety, but the more you use those, and it's early in the year, you risk the chance of not having funds to take on those other expenses that may occur during the year. So it's not absolute that we have to, but it is good planning in terms of utilizing the repair reserve for just these types of items.
So just to be clear, this is a fairly large amount, 80 some odd thousand, 84.5, that clearly we did not anticipate when this current budget was put together and approved. And it would be an awfully big chunk to take out at the beginning of the year. And it is a non-recurring expense, although not an emergency. So these are all reasons why this is the right thing to do.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Thank you. I agree.
I mean, I didn't ask you in advance, I apologize, but in terms of replenishment for this, to the reserve, can you just speak to how we do that?
In this particular case, we wouldn't have to replenish it
We have this hearing.
because we had the public hearing.
Okay.
In those cases where we would be obligated to replenish it if we didn't have the public hearing, and it would have to come out of, if there's excess funds at the end of the year, or maybe even budget for it, but we would have to put that money back within 2 years.
It's one of those ways that we can use those reserves here in the situation that we're under, where we're certainly not looking for extra costs, we're looking for fewer costs to be able to, yes, 84.5 is certainly a very large amount of money. But on the other hand, our reserves have that buffer to be able to absorb that kind of thing. That's why they're there.
Correct, yes.
Other questions from the trustees or from the public on this hearing before we close it? I assume you're getting up to speak, yes?
Quick question, was this portion of the roof of the high school, did it somehow go under the radar of when the bond scoping occurred and when you do the annual or semi-annual review of the buildings and grounds and the fitness of the buildings and grounds?
Actually came about, and they believe it was because of the heat over the summer. It is an older roof, but not one that was necessarily ready for replacement that would have been put into the bond with the installation of solar panels and other things that are happening under the EPC. Rather than when they noticed this bubbling of the roof, rather than put solar panels over a potentially problematic roof, they are repairing it.
Good, great, thank you.
Thank you. Patty, obviously we know who that is, but do we have, for the public, for the hearing? Okay. Yeah, that was Lisa Vizza. Gets to wear shorts to these meetings now. That's nice. Other questions or comments? Thank you. All right, with that, we will close the hearing and move on to action item 6, which is the actual action authorizing the expenditure of this repair reserve funds. Is there a motion? Thank you, Rich. Second? Thank you. Additional questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Board. We will now move on to our regular business and the primary discussion topic of the day, which is the, let's see, it's titled here, Discussion, Capital Reserve Purpose and Process. I just wanted to very briefly, if I could, kind of go through all of this. And I have different notes. So I'm just going to explain very quickly off the top of my head. Oh, here it is. Okay. That basically the discussion tonight is going to be more of a both informative, Chris, if I can say, and theoretical discussion, not of what specifically would be in a capital reserve right now, because that's a much larger process. We have 2 specific goals that we're looking to look at this year, which is the auditing of our existing infrastructure in the manner that that former trustee Vizza just mentioned, but also to do a very thorough interaction and communication with the community to determine what projects, in addition to those which are part of our existing infrastructure that are needed, also could be part of our future. And so that's how that process goes. Tonight is more to talk about what a capital reserve is, how it gets passed, what it's for. There was a lot of discussion with the previous one about where the funds come from. Does it create extra taxes? Is it part of what the funds that we already have? And why it's a mechanism that is effective for school districts to have. All school districts can have this availability. Most use it, and we certainly have. So that's the framing for tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to you and Jamie.
Great, thank you so much. So we are, kind of like we did over the summer, we're going to bring the screen down and present with the projector, if that's okay. And so I'm going to ask that we move to the seats on the floor. Just turn this a little bit. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And so I want to thank Mr. Pappas for really doing the large majority of the work in preparing for this evening's presentation on capital reserves. And part of why we're talking to the community about this is in some of our committee meetings and having individual conversations, we realized that with everything going on with the budgeting cycle, with everything going on with LIPA in the community, there is, I think, some confusion about the capital reserve, its processes, and also with the concern about the fiscal state of the district. We want to clarify some of that information and explain how, in our view, this could be a good tool for us to consider as we plan for the years ahead. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pappas.
We start talking about the capital reserve and how that's created and how it's used. I want to first explain what a capital project is. Capital projects are typically those larger projects. They're larger in scale, larger in cost, and take a lot more planning in terms of getting them done. A good example, I would say, is if you're putting one window in a building, it's not a capital project. It's a repair. It's a replacement. It's maybe handled through the regular budget and the regular line item through the Buildings and Ground Code. If you're replacing every window in the whole building, now you're looking at a capital project where it takes a lot more time, planning, and of course, money. Typically, capital projects are funded in three different ways. They can be funded within the regular annual budget. Normally, you will see a transfer on the line item, transfer to capital projects fund, which is a fund where these projects are paid out of, which is different than a capital reserve. You can also fund these capital projects through borrowing, which we have done. All the work that has gone on this summer, previously, and will continue next summer, was all done through the borrowing and bonding, issuance of bonds to pay for it. And you can also do it through the establishment and use of a capital reserve, which is why we're here tonight to discuss. A capital reserve is created in order to cover the cost of a capital project. And it's in essence a savings account. It's putting away a portion of money over a period of time. Many projects are too big to fund in one single year, so you utilize a capital project and you fund a portion of a certain project or many projects over a number of years, and you do them as the funding, as you create enough funding or save enough funding to do those projects, then you move forward and you start to do those projects. Capital project, it's a planning tool. It's good financial planning in terms of what you need to do. You look forward as to what you want, what we may need to do in the coming years, and you plan for it. And that's really where the capital reserve comes in. It's an important tool for planning. It allows you to set aside funds over a period of time and not affect the budget in any one year. It allows for the maintenance and planning of maintenance and upkeep of certain items throughout the building, whether it be roofs, windows, athletic fields. It allows you to plan for the replacement and upkeep of that. Again, as I mentioned, some capital projects are way too costly to do in 1 year, so it allows you time to plan to collect those funds and put it aside. And ultimately, it saves the district, because when you plan forward and you can do some of these projects, you're doing them without having to go out and borrow, which of course, always has a cost involved, whether it be interest or just the legwork in doing that borrowing. The capital reserve, there are many different types of reserves. Some are just created by the board's ability to create those reserves. Some are created by something that has happened, and it automatically warrants the creation of a reserve. And then some must be created with voter approval. A capital reserve is created with voter approval. The proposition that is put forth for the public to vote on must include the purpose for which the fund is being established, ultimately the amount that you would want to fund, the maximum amount that you would fund that capital reserve up to, and as well as what you're going to do with those capital funds, and finally, the source for which those funds will come from. So there are several ways in which a capital fund can be funded. The most important is probably a transfer from fund balance. Many of those things happen at the end of the year. If there's a small amount of money left over, it can be placed into a capital reserve. And each year you do that for a number of years till you get to the point where you can actually do the projects that you have planned. Transfer from an unexpended portion of an old capital reserve as seed money for the new capital reserve, and also potentially transfers from other reserves that only those reserves that the board would have authority to transfer out of. Typically, those same reserves are those that the board had the ability to set up without a public vote. In the same way that they are created, the only way that the funds can be expended from a capital reserve is through a public vote of the items. And they would typically vote on the set of the projects and the cost for which that proposition would be set up. And again, they can only be expended for the purpose for which they were set up. How the projects will be selected. In determining the projects that will be included, the first thing is prioritizing what the needs are, the immediate needs, the long-term needs. Over the coming months, there will also be input from students, community members, community organizations, booster clubs, and the faculty and staff. So we start by seeing what are our immediate needs, whether it's a roof, something else, and then also what are those needs that we would like to get accomplished over the next few years. District has had two reserves. They've had a number of capital reserves, but the more recent was one in 2008 that was established at an amount of $8 million. It listed certain projects. It was able to be funded over 10 years, which is a common funding period. As we can see, it shows where as I had mentioned, the proposition has to show where the funding is coming from. In that initial proposition, it was to take $2.6 million out of the repair reserve. That was part of the proposition that was voted on. And the maximum amount that could be funded each year was $1.5 million if it's available, but can never be any more than that. And some of the projects that were funded were boiler replacements, ceiling replacements, heating and ventilation, roof replacements at the middle field, and in particular, 2008 also had the track and field installation. That, because it is a 10-year life, that first capital reserve has been fully funded and it expired in 2008. Oh, sorry, my apologies. The next capital reserve was established in 2016. And again, it was established for an amount of $88.5 million over a period of 10 years. The proposition showed where the initial and next funding would come from, and it also showed the projects that would be funded through that reserve, including air conditioning, kitchen equipment, some classroom upgrades, cafeteria and ceiling in the high school, and the locker room renovations at the middle school. That was funded up to an amount of $7.2 million currently. The final projects that were part of that reserve, one of them is in the process of just being completed, and that would be the nurses suite in the Glen Head Elementary School, which was one of the last projects that was on that had a vote to expend the money for.
Thank you. So I just want to reiterate some of the key points that Mr. Pappas made, which is, this really is a smart budgeting tool to use funds that the district already has. So it's not incurring additional expense on the taxpayer, which is just the kind of thing we need in this challenging time. But it is a process. It's a public process that involves working off of an initial list that we've developed that we do currently have based on recent information from construction we've done, from input we've gotten from some of our committees. But we need to keep that process going, get additional feedback from the public, meet with stakeholder groups, and we would also need to get more committee input from committees like our athletics committees, our arts committees, as well as our construction-based committees. After that, we would start whittling down a scope of projects, and we would start looking at costs, and those two things would kind of happen at the same time. Certainly, the costs would inform what those potential projects would be, in addition to what the input from the community and from the board is informing should be a priority. And this is a sample timeline, I should say. This isn't any pre-decided timeline, but this is kind of how it would go. That we would then finalize the scope and get other details and feedback from the Board of Education before we needed to then set up a vote and engage the community in educating the community about the capital reserve process, going over basic information like we did tonight, but also going over what the specific projects were and why they were chosen. And then there would be a community vote to establish a reserve. Again, this is a kind of a templated series of dates, not anything that has been decided yet, but we wanted to show you what it could look like. Anything else, Mr. Paulson? Okay. So thank you very much. We're going to work with the board now to have a discussion about this. Thank you.
Okay, so as we watch the screen recede, I will ask if there are any trustees who would like to kick us off. Trustee McCary.
I'll start. Thank you so much for that presentation. And you sort of addressed it, see, like, I worry that people in the community are going to say, why are we talking about a capital reserve when we are in the midst of this LIPA crisis? And you did address this. The answer really is because of the LIPA crisis that we need the capital reserve really now more than ever. Capital reserve, like you're saying, is a mechanism. It's a financial planning tool so that we're able to save money today for future infrastructure. So here we are in this climate, and we talk about it every single meeting, where we're facing cutting services or raising taxes, probably a combination of both. This capital reserve really would reduce the need to do so, because we can take money not needed today and put it toward future projects. So when you think about a capital reserve too, it's also really a way to incentivize savings this year, because as you discuss, we can use money that we saved and put it toward next year, future year projects. So it really allows for like a shift in spending. So instead of making Band-Aid fixes to things, we have a mechanism where we're able to really fix infrastructure in the way it's meant to be fixed. So instead of like patching a roof, right, we now have a savings fund where we can plan long-term to replace a roof. I was thinking a little bit, in terms of today's presentation, and I was thinking about the previous capital reserve that we put up, which was voted down. And I think on the surface to many people, it might not seem prudent to put up a capital reserve again. So I started to think a little bit about why it might have failed. And we've talked about it before, different kinds of theories. And I really have like three hypotheses, maybe why that previous one failed, and going forward, what we can do to rectify it. I think one thing was that it was just too narrow in focus. And while we're not today talking about specific projects, I think as we start to solicit community input, and like you said, I was glad we're engaging all stakeholder groups, and you put students first, which I think is really important. We need to have broad-based appeal. And remember that there are invisible projects that need to be funded, projects which keep our buildings safe and functional. We talked last meeting about septic systems, and we have elevators and all these things which aren't exciting that need to be done. I think it's also important that, like you said, that we solicit input from administrators and from teachers, because the projects that we put into this capital reserve really should align with where our curriculum is at. And so that you don't want to invest in projects if we don't think that there's a need for them long-term for curriculum. The timing of a vote, I know that you have the outline there. I think we can't make the same mistake where we tie the capital reserve vote to the budget vote like we did last time. I think it just creates too much confusion. Obviously, there's certain legal notices that must be followed. But if you look at the calendar, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, it's a Tuesday. It's the week after we have a budget boot camp scheduled and the week before a vacation. So I don't know, that seemed like it might be a nice opportunity to market a capital reserve. It's easy for people to remember the date. And by setting up that reserve sooner rather than later, it allows us to begin saving in the spring so that we can get projects started earlier. I think maybe the third hypothesis about why that capital reserve failed had to do really with the misinformation. And for anybody who lived in the community when the capital reserve was up for vote knows that there were signs all over the place saying to vote down the reserve. And, I was thinking a little bit about it. We compare ourselves to so many different communities. I don't know if they have signs like that so prolific in the community. We need to figure out a way for people to ask questions, to get the correct answers for what a capital reserve is, like what we're doing tonight, but over and over again. And I think we should think about running a series of community forums this year. We can start just like what we did today. What is a capital reserve? Why is it fiscally prudent? Have breakout groups where people can go to a different group looking at, to what interests them. You're interested in athletics, you go to that group. You're interested in infrastructure, you go to that. You need more answers on why they're fiscally prudent, you go to that breakout group. And the idea is the more opportunities that we have to disseminate this information, I think, the better. So I am all in favor of a capital reserve. I think right now, given our situation, it's the best way to preserve our investment in this district.
The timing. So I want to talk about that a little bit. I understand, that there's a lead time here. Here's my concern, that if we don't have the vote to March, right, and there's things that are in that capital reserve that we think are health and safety issues, if that capital reserve fails, we really don't have time to go back and put them in the budget. Also, if that fails, you're not going to be able to get these projects done for the next year unless they're in the budget, because it has to be approved. Then you have to submit the work to SED. SED has to approve it. It's quite a process, and there are some immediate needs that we have that should be addressed sooner than later. So I guess if we're talking about a March vote, then I think it might be incumbent on us to put some of the projects into the budget. And I think we're really going to have to think about that in connection with the capital reserve. You know, the dance program not having a safe place really right now to dance. We've heard a lot about the turf field. Those are just two that examples. I'm sure there are plenty of others. We've gotten a long list. Some of those projects have been done already with the bond and the last capital reserve, and some of them are pending. And I know we have to prioritize, but I think we really need to figure out, if we're doing this in March, if there are projects that particularly need to be included in the budget and what impact that's going to have.
Okay, thank you both. Other trustees? Thoughts?
Is it okay if I put you on the spot? I know I didn't ask you this question before, but I think it might be helpful to also talk about why a cap reserve is different from other reserves, because a common phrase you hear in the community is spend the money you have. We have plenty of money, which we have. Some of our reserves are actually large amounts of money. So can you maybe speak to that and why the cap reserve is different and why we don't necessarily have access to those other reserves to do these health and safety, to meet the health and safety needs and some of these other issues? I'm sorry I didn't ask you in advance.
That's okay. Those reserves, the other reserves are set up for a particular purpose, and they have to be spent for those particular purposes, whether it was ERS, the TRS reserve, workers' comp. We have a few different reserves set up for different purposes. So we can't use those funds to do health and safety and projects in the same fashion. Really, doing these projects can be done only through a capital reserve or through the regular budget. And planning in that fashion. So hands are kind of tied in terms of utilizing those other funds. Some of them can be used maybe to help support the capital reserve by a board transfer, by board authority, depending on how the reserve was originally set up. But really, capital reserve is the vehicle for addressing this.
Ask a follow-up question to that. I know I already spoke, but you could actually utilize those other reserves to help you, because you could use those reserves for the line item. So you could use more of the reserve, let's say for an ERS or a TRS line item, and then you would have money within your budget to put the projects under a capital project, right? So there is a way. There's also, every time you use reserves, there's an impact. You reduce the reserves, you affect the 2% calculation. But there is a way to utilize that reserve money to free up other dollars to do the capital projects, right?
And yes, in terms of the budgeting, and those reserves, I think, have been used over the years for just that purpose. I know a number of years ago, those reserves were much higher when I look back at the history, and they have gone down over the past few years, but that is a vehicle for utilizing those reserves in planning for the budget.
I think, yeah, it's a good question. The answer is yes. To expand upon it just a little bit is that you couldn't, as of course Marion knows, we couldn't use the money that's in ERS to build it, to replace the turf field, for example. But you could, knowing how much you have in your budget, use that money to cover ERS, which, by the way, is employee retirement system obligations that the district incurs, to offset lines in the budget, which would then free up other funds in the budget. So it's indirect, but it absolutely is a way that you could do that. And because that would be done through the budget process, it would then be voter approved. So it would all be in accordance with state ed law.
Right. Yes.
The other thing I think is important to mention in this conversation is there's a lot of question about what we actually have in reserves. I want to throw out a number, Jamie, and you can tell me I'm right or wrong, but if I'm right, that can become the universal language we use. Is it fair to say we have approximately $18 million in restricted reserves and somewhere of very roughly 4.3 in the unrestricted 4%?
The unappropriated fund balance, yes, is around 4.3, and I think the regular restricted reserves are a little less than $18 million.
Less than 18, minus 84.5 that we just spent.
Well, true.
Yeah. Okay.
Some of that's encumbered already, right? Or no?
I think those are unencumbered. And that was one of the things that I think came up in the conversation last time, is that there are reserves, and then there are capital accounts. So for example, in this, I'm pointing at a slide that of course is long since receded, but there showed the 2016 capital reserve that still has projects that have not been completed yet. And the reason, there are many reasons the Glen Head Nurses Suite hasn't been completed yet, but one of the reasons was that your esteemed predecessor was able to find Olivia Boazzi was able to find efficiencies between the bond work that's going on there and that project to be able to make it more cost effective because you have a contractor there doing them. On our books, that money gets transferred to a capital reserve account. Is that what's the right word for it?
The capital
Project.
Capital
projects fund.
projects account fund,
Right.
which is a accounting holding area, but it shouldn't be confused, which as I just did, of course, so I apologize, with the capital reserves. But that money is allocated there, so that's not really there. But that might be where that's the encumbrance question. But we have a little under now 18 million in those. I saw the number 100 million. Someone said there are hundreds of millions. That would be nice. Then we would not have the issues that we do have. But also it's better than having 8. So it's not like we're totally dead in the water. But that 18 million for what our overall budget is, which is about $115 million last year, probably puts us I would say a little lower than the median for what districts on Long Island have in terms of their reserves.
Correct, I would say that's
Okay,
fair,
that was I think our external auditor, Alan, you kind of used that number with us in the past. So in terms of what Andrea talked about, having a common dialogue of what we're discussing, if you see someone say we have hundreds of millions of dollars in reserves, that is not an accurate number. That said, I really spoke out of turn, so everyone else who wants to jump in, please.
Well, I'm sorry, Rich, go ahead.
Okay.
Just to piggyback off this point, though, I do want to say that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but our reserves also help us with our interest rates. And, if we had no reserves, our rating would be pretty low and we'd have trouble getting, borrowing money and with interest rates, of course. So I guess my point is that when we spend down these reserves, if we just spent them down willy-nilly, then we'd have other problems.
Reserves help your Moody's
That's what
rating, bond rating, and that in turn affects at the rate that lenders will lend to you. So it does indirectly, but what it really does, it helps your Moody's rating.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you. And as far as the capital reserve is concerned, I also am all for it. And I think it's obviously the fiscally responsible way to move forward. I'm actually surprised we don't do it more often. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot again because I didn't ask this question in advance. But I'm just wondering, do most school districts put capital reserves up to their community, and how often? You don't have to answer right now. It's you can get back to us on that. But I'm assuming, this seems like the way to maintain a school district's infrastructure.
because the capital reserve, typically the 10-year, creating it for a certain amount and funding it over 10 years and doing projects over 10 years. It's not that districts are going out and creating a capital reserve every year. And so probably every 5 to 10 years, depending on the projects that you've done, it's not an uncommon thing to do. Probably 10 years being the norm.
Trustee Galati?
I was going to ask something actually related to that. The examples that you gave, the term of the funding was 10 years. Is that just standard? Is that a maximum, or is there flexibility in that?
There is flexibility. You choose the term, how long it's gonna be, and how you're gonna fund it, and there is flexibility in that. Correct.
Thank you. Other trustee questions or points?
Questions on the presentation, Jamie. And it actually just builds on all of these other comments so far. So if we look, I just wanted to look back at the 2008 capital reserve. The slide says it was established in 2008. Was it a typo that at the bottom it says it expired in May 2008?
Yes, that is. I apologize, and I'll correct that. It expired in May of 2018.
Right, okay, because it was a
So-
10-year period. So, and follow on to Rich's question. So when you choose a 10-year period, you are funding it, you have the 10 years to fund it up to the maximum amount that you have specified. Do you also have to expend that money in that same 10 years?
No, you do not.
Do you have a limit?
You have no, there's no limit. You can continue to expend after that 10-year period if there are funds still in the reserve
Okay.
and there are projects that you're still looking to do.
Right, again, it can, but no matter how long it takes you to do it, that money can still only be spent on the projects that were originally identified as being in that reserve,
Correct.
right?
You can though, can I just modify that answer? Because you can spend beyond the 10-year period, and we've in fact have done that.
Yes,
But what we have also done is if a new capital reserve is established, you could take the balance that's remaining
Yes.
in a capital reserve and place that money in the new capital reserve. So the money can actually be spent on other projects, but the capital reserve has to be approved, so the projects have to be approved. And then the movement of the money out to do those specific projects have to be approved. So
you
there is
anticipated,
kind
you
of,
anticipated my next question. I still need to clarify that. Thanks, Mary Ann. So if we have capital reserve with project A, B, and C in it, and we haven't, and we funded it, we fully funded it, and we did project A and B, we never did project C. Now we're establishing a new capital reserve. If we transfer the money from the original one that's now expired, but has project C still incomplete, we have a little bit of money left. We want to transfer it to the new capital reserve. Project C cannot be, if project C is not also listed as being part of the new capital reserve, then that project basically falls into the ether, right? Unless you've taken care of it in some other way.
And in most cases, that those projects are also part of the next capital
Okay,
reserve.
you
Because
would-
if it was needed before, chances are it's still needed, so you would just continue and
Right.
and
It
that
would be an
part of the new
extraordinary
reserve.
circumstance where it wouldn't be needed anymore. I mean, it's not impossible, but it would be extraordinary.
Correct.
Okay.
And if the need for it is no longer exists, then the actions can be taken through a public vote also with whatever funds are left in the capital reserve. There have also been instances where if a big project comes up that wasn't in the initial proposition, that you could have a special proposition to say, we want to add this project to that capital reserve because it wasn't something you knew when it was created, but that also would be part of a new proposition that would require a public vote.
That's really interesting. Didn't know that that could be done. Okay, one more on, so again, on now the capital reserve that was established in 2016, that 10-year period has not expired. It was established to have a maximum amount of 8.5 million. Here we say that it was funded, you do say it was funded up to the maximum amount. Where did I thought I saw something earlier that, yeah, where did I see that? I don't, okay. But 7.2 million is not the maximum amount.
No, it's not. And I actually amended that slide, but the slide that went up was not the final slide. So,
Oh, okay,
which
great.
is why I didn't.
So I actually
My-
printed
my-
it from the right location, which is why I can't see the 7.2 anymore, but thank you.
So,
Okay.
yes, so I
Okay.
apologize for that, which is
Just
why I
just
did
'cause-
not mention that.
Could you just explain what the 8.5 is, what the 7.2 is for everyone watching?
So when it was originally established, it was established with a maximum amount of $8.5 million. To date, they have funded it, meaning the board has resolved to put funds in it up to, currently they've put $7.2 million into it. Could add another $1.3 million to that reserve. We still have 3 or 4 years to do that and continue with the projects. What I did say during that slide was the projects that have been approved by the public to be done have all been done. If there are other projects in there that have not been in a different phase of that, they have not been completed, they would roll into the new capital reserve and give more time to get them done if they're cost more money and fund.
And also choose at this point not to fund, it seems like it would make sense not to put any more money in here if all the projects are in fact completed or about to be completed.
Projects that were voted on to be expended.
That were originally, right.
That
okay.
the public voted on to, yes, we want to use this funding. for these purposes has been, they're in the final phase, the Glen Head Nurses Suite being the last of those projects.
Okay, and that was a great, I just wanted to reemphasize that really interesting point that you made, Dave, about, you know, taking advantage of the efficiency of the current bond work to roll in a project that was originally slated to be part of this capital reserve and get presumably better pricing on all of it as a result of doing more work. But it's,
It was more than that, though, Maria. It wasn't just the efficiency of the pricing. It was that we were reconfiguring where the location was of the nurse's office. So when we realigned the building, it didn't make sense to spend the money from the capital reserve to renovate the nurse's office, because it had to be done in connection with the rearrangement of the building at Glen Head.
Let me ask a couple of the questions that came up that I thought of in Maria's question. In that, well, first of all, that capital reserve in 2016 was full of projects that were estimated in 2016 as costing the approximately $8.5 million. There are set up in all of these projects, as there are in the bond and other things, with we don't call them optional projects, we call them if you still have the money left over projects, because you certainly don't know in 2016 what things are going to cost in 2022 or 2026 for that matter, which is the ultimate endpoint of that. Although it should be noted for the community, we do build escalations into our costing, as well as contingencies. You don't know if you're going to open up a wall and find a family of raccoons or something in there. You're just same as your house. So you have to build that in with municipal projects. You can't just assume for the best and then say, "Oh, bad news, we'll just take more money." So I guess knowing all of that, the question then becomes, I don't need to know what they are, but there are still projects in there that have not been done.
That is correct. And in looking at the more recent calculations that were done, if we added the 1.3 to this and had $2.3 million to spend in essence on a project, those projects are currently close to $4 million. And they're different things, some of which have been talked about for the new capital reserve.
And of course, when you plan that in 2016, you do have a vision of what things are going to be. But to Mary Ann's point, we didn't know we were going to be doing the specific things in that building that then necessitated the movement of the Glen Head Nurses Suite to a different part of the building. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but the entire security apparatuses at all of our schools is something that unfortunately has become necessitated by the world in which we live. And that has changed the physical arrangement of those buildings. And that's in part one of the reasons why the Glen Head Nurses Suite makes more sense. You're dismissing kids through secure entry at all of our buildings in that way. But those changes, for the most part, you do have to have some vision of where you're going. And I think that was my point about the capital reserve. And I don't know, Maria, if you're finished before I segue into what I wanted to say. I absolutely agree with the building conditions survey and the audit of our infrastructure and understanding what our most pressing needs and seeing what was left over in the 2016 capital reserve, which, by the way, I think you alluded to, still has about $1 million in there. So that's something that could be transferred to be seed money to a new capital reserve. But for me, it would be important, knowing that these have a 10-year life, to also plan something that can be something we could be doing in 2030. I think it's important to have some visionary piece. We are dealing with a very serious financial challenge right now, as we all know, and we've talked about, and we'll continue to talk about a lot. But I don't want to look back 10 years from now and say we had an opportunity to still think big and not even big, but just have a vision of things that can actually improve our physical plan in association with where we're going to be going. One of the things that was talked about a lot is the potentiality of, for example, a second turf field. That is something that may never be able to happen through a capital reserve and funding. And that certainly is not something that can happen right away. But I'd like to think that if our process, which has to have fidelity and community input, yielded that was a desire for the community, that we could think about including a project like that that was something aspirational, something that we can set ourselves up for to build and improve for students of the future. I think we have to have at least one squinty eye toward the future, because yes, the challenges we're facing in these first 3 years of this LIPA settlement are going to be extremely challenging and are going to be tough and are going to require all the solutions that Chris and the administration and this board have been talking about. And then there's a leveling off period, and then there's some uncertainty. But there's also there's a horizon beyond those years. And I really want to make sure we're keeping an eye on that in the process. So as you talk to the community, both within the schools and outside of the schools, I hope there are questions, there are queries, there are topics about what might you like to see? What's at least some visionary piece? I talk about this at almost every board meeting for some reason now, but yeah, I like replacing septic systems if that's what we need. I like replacing, steps that may be on the verge of being broken. But I also would like to think about things that can be providing the students who are maybe not even born yet with something that can make North Shore special for them. So that should be at least a part of this as far as I see it. Thank you.
That was good.
Okay. Thank you. Are there other comments or questions?
Just to piggyback a little bit it's a process question also about funding. So if we were to put something, say, aspirational, and it would really light up a certain segment of the population and the community who then wanted to get behind it in the fundraising and say, hold their own independent fundraisers and really embrace, our need to fund this project, is that a mechanism that is available to them and that we could hold the communities separate from our own fund balance? Could it be funded? Because it wasn't in your presentation. So I just want to clarify, is that something that we could do as well?
I have to check into that. I believe that you're limited to what you say you will fund per year, but that's the board. So I would look into that and I'll get back to you because I'm not quite sure if you got donations of a certain amount, if you could put those in the reserve as well, in addition to whatever you could at the end of a year. So
Great.
It's a great question. Sorry.
If I had caught the Aaron Judge home run ball last night and was able to auction it for 1.5, put it in some giant project, that would be the way we would do that.
Exactly that.
All right. Well. Other questions?
For the record, he hasn't hit it. He hasn't hit number 61 yet tonight either.
I'm sure we'll hear a roar from somewhere. Other comments or questions on the cap reserve?
Actually, I do have one more thing.
Please.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding something correctly too. Just maybe it's stating the obvious, but going back, tying in with the aspirational idea as well as going back and looking at, the idea of having, putting up new reserves every 5 to 7 years, just because it is the right way to manage a huge budget, to run an enterprise as large as this with good planning. When, for instance, the capital reserve from 2016 was established, interest rates were extremely, were way lower than they are now, right? And what we're in a period now where interest rates are so far pretty steadily rising. So just to go back to the point that Lisa and Marianne were making, this is this is a powerful reason also to keep using this mechanism, is that we can't predict the future, right? If any one of these projects had to be done without the benefit of the capital reserve, we had to do them borrowing now, hadn't anticipated that we would need them 5 years ago, it would be costing us a lot more money than if we had the money in the reserve. Okay.
Correct.
I just think it's such a compelling reason that I want to make sure people understand that.
Plus the money in the reserve throws off interest that stays in the reserve, right?
It
Earns
collects
interest,
interest,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
helps to further fund it.
I would also add that just because something is in a capital reserve doesn't mean you don't have the option of putting it into the regular budget or, some future bond or some other thing. It gives you the flexibility.
I could add one thing, because now that I thought about the question with if you had a club, somebody come and say, we want to give you X amount of money to fund, the capital reserve can be used for all or part of the expenditures of a particular item. So if somebody were to come and give a large donation, it may not make a difference whether you can further fund the capital reserve. If there are funds already there, you would use that donation for a portion of it and what's in the capital reserve for the other portion. So there may be ways. I will check into it regardless, but I know it's all or part. It doesn't all have to come from the capital reserve.
You could have a project that was listed at $2 million, and if someone gave $1 million of their own money for it, you could then expend the $1 million with a community vote to supplement the private donation to compose the full.
Finish a project that was in that reserve. I believe so. So I will still check into that, but I do believe that that's an option.
Manhasset did it. If you look at
Yeah.
Manhasset's budget.
But I'm also interested in the year-long community engagement portion. You know, if this is something that's a long-term planning and there's a drive by this group annually, and they're collecting, I'm making up numbers, $50,000 a year. So then they want security that will go towards this particular project. Can we then, if there's security, if it's in the capital reserve, right? Because it can only be spent on that. So I just wonder if those monies can be combined.
We'll
Yeah.
look into that. Thank you.
The one thing we do know is that annual funding limit that you have built into it. So that would just be one thing we know, but we will.
Sorry.
To go back to that though, if the capital reserve can fund a portion of a project, does that also mean, like, similarly, that you could put in your regular budget the other part of it, right? So if you have a project that costs $1 million, could you fund half of it through your budget, half of it through the capital reserve? You could.
About the law. So we talk about what you're allowed to do, right? This is all defined statutorily. One of the things you're doing is specifying the annual maximum of funding. Is there a limit? Does the law define a limit? Is it, you can't put more than, 10% of the full value in every year or something? I'm just making this up. But.
No, it's
Okay.
you would define that in the proposition, and the public would vote if they're agreeable.
Or comments that trustees may have?
This is a wonderful presentation. I did mention earlier that I think this would be another great item for the LAC to have available as a maybe a distillation of it, but as a handout at informational tables that we've talked a lot about in terms of its community engagement efforts. Thank you.
I think from my perspective, it's very easy to feel like we've all been working together for a long time, but you're still really new here. It was a really, really nice presentation. I appreciate it. It was thorough. It covered what I anticipated this to be about, but in more depth, particularly the slide of the history. It was a nice trip down memory lane. All right, good. So with that, I believe I will close this topic. Has anyone else lost the connection to board docs? Just me? You did. All right.
Still connected also.
Okay, so we are at the public comment, which doesn't really require me to be on board docs, but if not, I'm going to grab that binder next to Chris and run the meeting on paper. You're back. Great. So with that, we will open public comment. Everyone is welcome to please come and share your thoughts on any topic related to the district at the podium. Just state your name and town of residence, and please share what you're thinking. Thank you, Chris. Actually, with these, if you just put the mic in your direction and just start speaking with name and town of residence.
Hi, everyone. Oh my gosh. Joanna Clancy of Glen Head. Thank you so much, Mr. Pappas. That was really educational, and I really understand what the capital reserve is. I just want to talk about two things. I'm a little bit worried about the capital reserve, and I know that we didn't talk about projects going into the capital reserve, but I am a little bit concerned that, and I'm going to bring it up again, that our turf will be part of that capital reserve. And since it's such a long term, we have to vote on it and we have to blah, 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 blah. And it's a very long process and we're in dire need of it. So I urge you to consider putting it as a regular line item budget because it's as a necessity. I wish it was in the 2016 capital reserve, then we could actually use it. Maybe we'll take that $1 million that's left over and transfer it over. Just a thought. I also want to talk about 2 nights ago, I was part of the athletic advisory committee. Thank you very much for having me. We talked a lot about the tutoring process, so I just want to, I'm not sure if you spoke about that at all at your executive board session, whatever you call it. But the majority of us really, we talked a lot about the tutoring clause that's in your policy, the policy. So we did talk about that a lot. I'm sure that Dr. Z shared with you that most of us were very concerned about the tutoring policy for the athletics, and we are hoping that you can go to policy board and change that, or at least eliminate it, so that we can get very experienced and good coaches on our fields so that we can win. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris, do you mind if I just ask you just to very briefly just kind of summarize for the community what that policy, tutoring, and coaching is?
Sure, and thank you, Ms. Clancy. All districts have a tutoring policy that is really built to prevent a conflict of interest in teachers tutoring their own students, any kind of a situation where someone could be doing private work for a family that they're engaged in during the day. And so in 2019, we expanded the policy to include coaches. There were concerns about that conflict happening with club teams or other private lessons for individual sports. And so it was meant to be, I think, a preventative measure. Over the last year or so, there's been more discussion about, is there another way to phrase that policy, to provide oversight, to provide a mechanism that didn't outright prevent some of those other coaches from being involved in our own teams. And we did talk about this in athletic policy, as Ms. Clancy stated, because it is getting harder to find coaches. So I think that's big part of the discussion. How can we find the most skilled coaches? And a lot of those skilled coaches do engage in that work. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Z. Other comments from the public?
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Tessie Topol. I'm a resident of Seacliff. My son just started second grade at Seacliff Elementary School, and I'm here tonight representing the North Shore Parent Action Coalition, or NSPAC. While we are unaffiliated with the district, NSPAC believes that every child has a right to a safe, inclusive, and respectful learning environment. We want our kids to feel a sense of belonging, celebrating what makes them unique. Those differences make this district richer and more similar to the world at large, we believe. Moreover, NSPAC believes that all students deserve to graduate prepared to live, work, and thrive in a dynamic world full of all kinds of people. We feel strongly that our differences lift us and help enable our children to learn how to come together and work together as a cohesive, united whole. One shared tool we have to ensure our schools are welcoming and safe comes courtesy of the New York State Education Department, and it's DASA. For those who don't know, DASA refers to New York State's Dignity for All Students Act, the Dignity Act, which seeks to provide the state's public elementary and secondary school students with a safe and supportive environment free from discrimination, intimidation, taunting, harassment, and bullying on school property, a school bus, and or at a school function. 1 year ago, the BOE shared a DASA report conducted by District Council. The outcomes of that report had several recommendations. In support of the request and suggestion by trustee Macari at the last board meeting, we are requesting an update on how the recommendations have worked and what effect they have had on the school climate, particularly in the middle school, given that the middle school climate prompted the action of the investigation being conducted. We seek to understand how the board and administration has since assessed the climate 1 year since the DASA report. Thank you very much.
Tessie. Obviously, the superintendent doesn't have that answer right now, but he, even though I took his folder, he's making notes.
Roger Friedman, Seacliff. Is it accurate to say that spending down our reserves, our other reserves too quickly, such as ERS or TRS, to help fund the capital reserve fund by using more of those budgeted funds from the actual budget, which I think is what Marianne was suggesting could be done, not necessarily proposing to do it, but it could have a detrimental effect in the long term, because if we need those reserves down the road for the stated purposes, the money wouldn't be available, presumably.
Yeah, I think, yeah. No, I was going to say, I think in general, I'm not being glib, but I can't have your cake and eat it too. Yeah.
And I think, I don't remember who mentioned it, but also, as the reserves get lower, we risk having our fiscal stress scores go up higher, and thus increasing our borrowing costs. And I just want to point out that in 2021, our reserves were 23% of the budget, or total reserves, including the unrestricted reserve, and they're now 19%, based on my calculation. So they are going down. And at an audit committee meeting last year, I believe, the auditor said that we were at 23 to 25%, we were in the sweet spot. And if it got much lower, actually, he said as it gets closer to 10%, you risk really getting into trouble. So I just wanted to point out that the healthier our reserves can be, the healthier, obviously, our finances can be down the road. And just by way of comparison, some of our neighboring districts in 2021, Locust Valley had 26%. Jericho, which I think is way too high, had 45% of their budget were in reserves. And so I would advocate, for trying to maintain as best we could our reserves at a healthy level.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, the mics take like a second to pick up, so just get a little closer. I think we'll catch it.
Right here?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I hate my voice. Okay. So I didn't come for this, but I have a question regarding that number, the 18 million, just so I understand it better. Is that money invested in, do we reap the benefit of interest earned or distributions every year? Does that get reinvested? Does it stay in that reserve? Can you reply to that? Or
They are all in fixed instruments with, unfortunately, in this environment, relatively low yield. But of course, because it's the community's money, there's pretty much zero risk. There's zero risk possible. But it's not just in a zero interest. So it is. And we do get monthly statements, which we do approve here at the board, that show the status of every account at every penny, even, classroom accounts or small petty cash, relatively dormant, scholarship funds, et cetera, where we see everything as required by the state.
right, I understand. So it's invested, but it's minimal. Whatever we're earning is minimal.
Correct.
Okay. So the reason why
Which unfortunately is, compared to the stock market, as opposed to the past 8 years, suddenly the last 1.5. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's horrible.
It's horrible, I know. The reason I came up this evening is because coffee with the superintendent, I brought it up that I was going to bring it up, and I think one of the trustees was there as well, Cashman. I would like to ask the board, now that we're looking into the new budget, to take some time and evaluate the possibility of introducing a zero period for the middle school and high school, where students that receive additional support during the day, like reading support or get pulled out for skills, won't necessarily have to give up an elective or a language, so everybody can have a full curriculum. Some districts in neighboring towns do that. And since my kids do take the bus, and we're still in the process of finalizing, timing and who's on the bus and all of that, but I've been thinking about it. Maybe there's a way that we can potentially start the middle school and the high school even 15 minutes later. So instead of 8 o'clock, the bell will ring at 8:15. That would allow first period or zero period to start from 7:30 to 10 after 8, then E3 squad, and then the school will start. That would help alleviate the buses on the afternoon, so the kids from the middle school and the high school don't necessarily have to wait 20, 30 minutes until the buses come, because they're finishing the routes for the elementary school. I don't know how that affects the busing in the morning, because I understand we also have to bus kids that go to, private schools. So I know we have about 41 buses, and I don't know how, the whole structure, but I just want to ask you guys to take a look at that primarily for the zero period, just to give every student, the possibility of, the opportunity of having a full curriculum.
You touched on a lot of those issues, a lot of key issues. I know the congestion at that intersection in the morning for anyone who goes through it is certainly a challenge. Chris, do you want to talk at all about that, or maybe even just either you or Carol talk at least a part of whatever you would like to say, the current state of zero period?
Sure. So right now, and this is a little repeating, so I apologize, Ms. Rana, but we've worked very flexibly with our faculty, and they've been great to adjust their own day if they could come in earlier, or sometimes through an overage, to provide reading and often special education services for those students, so they don't miss other things. So we've tried to make it work as best we can. But you did, as President Lombard said, you hit on another issue there, and that's that traffic, that small traffic issue in the morning on Glen Cove Avenue, which we've talked a lot about this week, and issues also on the streets on the periphery, Cross Street, et cetera. It's a big issue. So. I'll just share, and speaking with the crossing officer there, his suggestion to me was, he said, "I've been here 6 years, staggered starts." Like he shared that. So it is a big change. It would take a lot of work and a lot of conversation, but it's a point well taken.
I think Syosset starts really late. I mean, Jericho, one of those districts, starts close to 9 o'clock, and then it shifts the whole thing. And I know then gets into varsity, the games get later, I know there's a lot of issues, but I think it's worth looking at it. Thank you so much.
Jericho has lights on its fields, so it can start later. Just saying.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I apologize. It's Katia, but I don't. Armata, sorry. No, I'm sorry. Thank you. That's okay. Brookville? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Other public comments? Yeah, that wasn't technically a public comment, that was a public hearing, so you're.
Savizza Glen Head, there you go. I just want to piggyback onto the conversation. I think, Lisa, you started about the capital reserve and maybe a public charitable foundation partnership. And somebody on this board has to remember about the track and field, the original track and field. Was that part of a bond or capital?
That was bond.
It was bond. And Viking Foundation picked up what? The field house?
Field house was partially funded by the Viking Foundation, and I believe the Booster Club also contributed to that.
Okay. Just wanted to remind people that it's happened before. Okay, thank you.
Comments in the public? Okay, no one's jumping up saying I left them out, so I'm going to close public comment. Thank you all very much. I will move on to the action portion of our event. Wow, I'm going back in time. I'm going to the paper. Here we go. So we will move on to action item. Is your laptop personnel? Well, I'm just, these aren't, it's not numbered on the printout. But I'll go through it. I'll just skip.
It's
Oh,
action
yes,
number
sorry.
9.
Because I have Wi-Fi.
You know, I got to tell you, for people who say this board doesn't work well together, look at this. Look at this. I'm getting so much help. I love it. Thank you, everyone. I'll use this printout. Thank you. So we're moving on to action item 9, which is personnel, and I'll ask for a motion. Thank you, and a second. Thank you very much. Comments or questions? I just wanted to recognize that we do have have a side letter on the clubs and organizations, and I guess if you could just talk a very little bit about that, what we're looking to do there.
Sure. So the side letter contains some stipend increases and a lot of new clubs that represent, I think, an effort towards more student engagement, represent the growing of certain areas like robotics and the level of hours that they work, certain sports that compete more. But I do think, in partnership with our teachers, this is a great example of how we've found some efficiencies, because part of the side letter includes a process for making clubs dormant that do not run over a couple of years. So it's, I think, a great example of how we found efficiencies while also creating new opportunities for students. In our analysis that we did in preparation for this, we found a savings of about $19,000 in terms of the clubs that aren't running versus what we're proposing. So there's actually a net savings in that.
Thank you. I think this issue really, first of all, I appreciate that. I think this really touches on two, I won't say competing interests, because they're both really high priorities for the board, which is, we all know that student engagement is hugely important, and that students who are in these clubs, that's their connection to the school, and it's their connection to their learning, and it provides structure. And obviously, just as we all know from children, engagement in activities related to the school is a much better alternative than engagement in some activities that are outside the school, and it promotes their learning. I like the fact that we are looking at numbers and metrics, but I want to also, we're not just looking at the no, we're not, but I want to highlight that for me it was a priority that we're not just looking at the attendance and the participation rates in these clubs, although that's important, but even a smaller club that really engaged those kids and that became their connection, their lifeline to the school, could be so important. So as we look at those clubs, it can't just be a straight formula, but it has to be a holistic look at what's going on in that actual club. The other side of the coin, which of course is so important, is the oversight. Both the board overseeing what's going on in these classes, and requiring and requesting that the administration be overseeing those clubs. So we're not certainly paying any money for clubs that aren't running. I know that's been something that has always been something that's been a priority for this board as a whole. And I think that we are really excited about feeling confident that that's going to continue to improve for us. That's what I have to say. Any other comments on the personnel before we call the vote? All right, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. We now move on to action item 10, which is the adoption of our 2022-2023 district goals. Is there a motion? Thank you, and I heard a second. Comments or questions? Thank the administration. I want to thank the board. We took some time to hew these into shape, but I think we have a achievable and very important list that can drive our efforts in addition to all the regular efforts that we do every year. So with that, I'll call the vote. All in favor of its adoption? Aye. Thank you. Action item 11 is the approval of the 22-23 organizational chart. Their motion?
Motion.
Thank you. A second? Comments, questions?
I do, actually. I have a couple. The nurses are not listed. Is that because they're considered faculty and staff?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second thing that I know I emailed you about, the psychologists on the chart are answering to the director of special ed. And if you look at the sort of the school psych research, a lot of people argue that this is not the correct way. It should be a dual reporting. you don't want the psychologist to just report to the director of special ed because you want the psychologist to serve all students in the building, including the general education students. And the idea is for the psychologist to be serving those gen ed students early on to prevent prevent them from funneling into special ed. So in a lot of schools, they have the psychologist actually reporting to both the building principal and the director of special ed.
And I think that's a great point. I think that really does capture what happens here. Our school psychologists are great. They're, of course, dedicated to their caseloads that are mandated, but they also work with all students, whether it's informal counseling or pushing in or talking to students at recess. They do so much. So that is something we could amend or add.
To everybody, it's not just, we work as a group.
We, now that you proposed it, let the administration look at it and make a recommendation. We could always change it on the fly. I'm not on the fly, we'd change it through a formal process, but at a later date.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, great. Comments or other questions on the organizational chart? All in favor? Aye. Action item 12, which I will split into 12A and 12B, which is the appointment of committee members. I will like to take a motion on 12A, which is the appointment of members of Legislative Action Committee, Andres Berry, James Fenson, and Sean Traeger. Is there a motion? And a second, I think I heard. Any comments or questions? Please.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you to all the people who volunteered to serve on these committees. We had a large number of people participate, and they are time-intensive committees. They're voluntary, so I'm very happy at the response that we got, and we do appreciate that. We spent lots of time discussing the situation, and although we always try to come to consensus, we don't always do that. And I feel that I don't want to diminish anybody who was interested in a position here, but obviously not everybody can be elected or selected to the committees. So I want to thank everybody for doing it, and my vote is not going to be reflective necessarily of my belief that people are not qualified to do it, but perhaps I just had a different perspective than some of my fellow trustees. So again, I don't want it to be mistaken for me not having confidence in the people. It's just that I felt strongly in a couple of cases.
I would also like to comment. I also agree with Rich. We did get a large pool of applicants, many of whom were qualified. Difficult decision as to who we selected. My vote is also not going to be reflective that I don't think the people that we picked were qualified. But I do want to, since I seem to be the historian up here, tell you a story. Back in, I believe it was 2013, there were a group of people, and they were called the North Shore Reform Group. They were a civic organization. One of their concerns was the LIPA situation. It was at that time there were talk of making the plant a pilot and some proposed settlement with Nassau County. Knowing that concern, and there was a lot of concern in the community at that time about the proposed pilots, as there is now. There were 3 people in that group, Vita Palmieri, Larry Ruisi, and Michael Nightingale, who arranged to have our legislators come to the American Legion and answer the community's questions most of which were centered around the LIPA situation. So your first legislators' night was not through LAC. It was through a community, a civic organization that people on the board at that time, members of the board at that time, did not look favorably upon either the members of that organization or that organization. That night was so successful that LAC continued that tradition. We expanded the size. I recruited Vito Palmieri to put his application into LAC. I also recruited Marty Glennon to put his application in, since they both had connections to politicians on both sides of the aisle. So my point is, when there are often ideas that come from, good ideas, right, that come from people who have differing views. Our goal this year is community engagement. We should be engaging the entire community, not just select parts of the community. Often, people have differing point of views. When they meet, they can come up with new ideas together that make us better and make us stronger. And my hope would be that in the future, that when we are making appointments, that we are more open to filling these positions with people who maybe have either privately or publicly disagreed with some of our policies, some of our decisions. I think if we really want community engagement and we really want to get things like the capital reserve passed, we want to get our budget passed, I think it's important that we make everyone feel included. So that is my concern and my hope within future selections, that we will reach out to those members of the communities who did submit their applications and that they be seriously considered for these positions.
Comments or questions?
Yeah, Dave, I noticed that we only are appointing for LAC and audit today, but there were 3 committees.
So one of the goals for this year is shoring up some of our bylaws and our rules for committee work. So in the past, the Community Budget Forum, the CBF, had not required board approval for those. And so that's not required, but those folks have been notified. There were, I believe, 15 folks or more who had applied to that committee specifically. And there were others who had applied to LAC and audit who were not selected, to whom we extended that invitation as well. So as of now, that does not require board approval.
So just to clarify, everybody who applied and did not get appointed tonight was invited to participate in a committee?
Heartily.
Okay.
But not everyone who applied for all 3 committees. Some people only applied for one particular committee.
Right.
So they really weren't interested in the budget forum. There were other people who applied for all 3. So the budget community forum may not have been something that interested some of the applicants.
Absolutely. Lisa Kolosiova?
Yes, I just wanted to say that we are lucky, I think, that we had so many really strong, really qualified candidates. And we deliberated for a very long time and had very thoughtful discussions about who to choose. And it was very difficult. And I also want to thank everyone who applied and encourage people to continue applying, because we need these voices. We need people to come and apply to these committees. And I really do hope that the people who didn't maybe get their first choice in committee will consider joining the Community Budget Forum, so that we can get all of those voices and come together as a community and learn about the budget, learn about engaging the community. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone who applied.
Can I echo that? And appreciate the history. Since I heartily agree with what's been said, I'm just going to point out something that might be a question in some people's minds. The reason that the terms are different for different people is that the administration and the board makes an effort to make sure that terms don't expire in chunks, that we're not, it was hard enough to choose only 3 people, but to choose 5 or 6 at a time would be really a challenge. And I also just must say out loud how deeply grateful I am for all the applicants. It was an enormous outpouring, and we were very lucky to have a really difficult choice. And yeah, I think our 4 hours of interviews and deliberation are evidence of our deep respect and desire to give as many opportunities as we could, and to be sure we were making a decision we were mostly comfortable with. So please do continue to become involved and look at other opportunities in the meantime, and try again for your favorite one. Thank you very much.
I also just wanted to add that I'll speak for Dave, and I don't know if anyone else is on the board, that he and I both come from a long line of people who rejected their first application for sitting on some of these boards and went on to serve the district. But also, not being named by us doesn't preclude community members from participating, maybe not from attending, certainly. And there are mechanisms through communication. I think when Roger was speaking, he alluded to audit meetings that he attended as a private citizen, not having been named to the committee. So these are open meetings. They're subject to open meeting laws, and they're available for people to go to. We had to make some choices that were difficult, and I agree. Thank everyone in the community for applying. I hope that we have hard decisions well into the future.
Thank you. Yeah,
And I'll just say that many of the people who we appointed tonight have applied multiple times over the years, just like the 2 of you. And I'd also like to thank all of my trustees during deliberations for being so articulate and having so many different thoughts that we all were able to share and listen to. And I want to know that I appreciate all of you.
I appreciate the comments from my fellow trustees. Lisa, the point you made was very accurate, that my first year, I had applied for LAC. It did not pan out. And as I communicated with a community member today, I joined other committees. I went on to reapply for LAC. I decided to increase my involvement, and I felt that I was a stronger candidate for LAC when I had participated in those other committees. But I also want to say something that I think is important to me as the leader of this board. Everyone on this board has the right to their own opinion and their own thoughts about this process. I personally very clearly reject the idea that these choices of these candidates were made on politics, or who's friends with who, or who voted for whom, or all those different things that I am frankly not very, I'm very strongly in disagreement that these candidates were chosen by anything other than their qualifications. And I think it is an unfortunate circumstance to imply that somehow that favoritism and that there's a lack of openness to different perspectives. There's one committee member who's being appointed tonight who I had never met until that person popped up on our video screen 2 nights ago. And I didn't know that that person would emerge from this process at all. And while I appreciate the history that you provided, Trustee Russo, as I'm sure you would agree, history is subjective and told through the eyes of the beholder. And I would hate for someone to view this and use this as a political cudgel to be able to say that, once again, the board is shutting people out. I'm aware that people will say that. I think it's unfortunate. I think it's unfair to all the people who have served this district and continue to volunteer for this district. And I look forward to the folks who have applied. We had many applicants, many qualified applicants, as we had last year. And the assumption that these were made on anything other than their qualifications is everyone's right to have that. But I would like it to be noted in the minutes that my vote for these people, which will be in the affirmative, was based on my belief that given all the circumstances, these were the right candidates for these positions, and I stand behind that. Are there any other questions or comments before we take the vote? We're starting with 12A, which is the appointment of our 3 new Legislative Action Committee members. All in favor of appointing, I'm going to just do last names, Berry, Svensson, and Traeger, as listed on the agenda. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? You have all 7, Betty? Thank you. It is thusly resolved. I would like to take a motion on the appointment of Roger Friedman to the Audit Committee. Is there a motion
Motion.
and a second? Thank you. I don't think there's probably any other comments or questions. If anyone would like to make any, please. Obviously, the floor is open. Yeah, please.
My comments before applied to both of these.
That's what I figured.
It wasn't just for A.
Same here.
Thank you. With that, I will then call the vote. All in favor of Roger Friedman's appointment? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll move on to action item 13, which is the approval of contracts. Is there a motion
Motion.
and a second? Any comments or questions? Only comment is that in the past, there's always been a clamor from this board to make sure that we did not approve contracts with retroactive dates. I think we're 4 for 4 on the positive on these. So I thank you very much, Jamie, and the business office for making sure that we're approving things that are going to happen and not things that have already happened, although sometimes that is necessitated by circumstance. Any other questions or comments before we approve?
Just a real quick thank you to Carol for the background she gave us on these 3 contractors. This looks like really fantastic professional development that's coming forward. So thank you.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Action 14, which is the approval of a DASNY grant disbursement in the amount of $250,000 towards the newly renovated middle school softball field. Is there a motion? I heard lots of seconds on motions. I'll let Betty sort that out. Any comments or questions?
Just want to take a moment to thank Assemblyman Chuck Levine for his support of this grant. He's given us support in other areas as well, and we're very grateful for it. We did let his office know that the board was acting on this evening.
I have a real quick question, sorry. Just to clarify, it refers to the softball field. That's the middle school softball field, right? Just want to be clear on that.
That's
Yes,
correct.
that is correct.
Thank you.
Yes, it is a field that has had a long history of getting repaired. These funds were allocated I'd say many, but multiple years ago, and it was determined that there was a drainage issue that, for lack of the need to go into it any further, was extremely complicated regarding different authorities over the various pipes and infrastructure above and underneath the ground that was causing that flooding. So once that was all resolved after a very long time, we were able to move forward, and we'll see how fast the grass comes in.
Very exciting. Thank you.
Questions or comments? All in favor of the DASNY grant disbursement? Aye. Got everyone, Betty? Yes, thank you. Action 15, approval of a special education consultant agreement. This is A and B. Is there a motion?
Motion.
I heard a second. Comments or questions? All in favor? Aye. And finally, action 16, which is the approval of special education services. Is there a motion? Thank you. And a second? I got it. Thank you. Comments or questions? This is with Locust Valley. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. We will now move on to old business, and I'll ask trustees to please share any comments from old business they have.
Go. The bus cameras, I know it was in the update. Jamie, I don't know, how are we going to move forward with this? Because I do think it's important. We received an email about it. I don't know.
It would require an action on the board's part, and they are willing to come and speak to us, or we could kind of pass the information along from them. Jamie, do you want to add? Have you done a lot of work on this?
the conversation about Bus Patrol, a company that puts the cameras on the buses, and they are currently in about 26 districts in Nassau County. They are in all of the buses in Suffolk County.
Just to clarify, the outside of the bus.
They actually supply, yes, the outside of the bus, but they also provide cameras inside the bus, which is for just as another benefit. But the primary reason for the bus cameras are the outside of the bus to catch those individuals that would go around the bus that was stopped with their stoplight out.
Yeah, and I'll just use that example that Trustee McGarry mentioned, and that is that we did receive an email from a parent. We had a nice dialogue on the phone and an email, and showed the bus stop, a car going right by, kind of as the stop sign was being let out and the door was opening. So it would capture that, and it would result in fines and help keep our kids safe.
I mean, the benefit to the district is that increased safety and the disincentivization from folks to, get somewhere 2 minutes earlier and potentially put kids in danger. It should be noted, as I think is recorded, that the actual fines do not go to us; they go to the county. So we get hopefully increased safety, and they get to mail out hopefully not very many tickets, but if it is what it is
The program is no cost to us,
to us.
right?
But
No benefit, but
No revenue.
No monetary benefit, but no cost.
In some municipalities where they're doing this, the money is collected and then goes into like a safety funds. Is that what's happening in Nassau or no?
Not in Nassau nor Suffolk, but the funds are going to the county, or in some cases, if it's sponsored by the town, the town.
Thank you. Other old business? Sorry, Lisa, please.
I just wanted to bring up the DASA complaints, the DASA investigation again, only because Trustee McCary had brought it up last meeting, and then we heard from Ms. Topol in public comment. So just want to make sure that it's on our radar.
Yeah, and Dr. Smythe and I will look at our presentation calendar and see where we can either fit it in. If it applies, we've talked about our transitions meeting, so we'll see if there's a home for it. It is a big topic. If not, we'll find a place for that, and we'll update that calendar. Just super quick, last year after that report, we had training from Karen Cyrus, who helped write the DASA law, retired principal from Oceanside. We've started collecting data. Our data collection is much tighter. We have a shared spreadsheet that I see and monitor. And so we have data for the 21-22 school year in a much more comprehensive and efficient way than we've ever had before. We're continuing that. And then we have forms and protocols as a result of the training that we're following. So, but we will get more data and make a comprehensive presentation.
And I don't think it has to be, a rehashing of DASA, but more looking at school climate, like continuing sort of the ideas of, are our students safe? How are we keeping them safe? What systems do we have in place? That type of thing.
So I see, we're going to be talking about the North Shore Journey, achievement. We're going to talk about transition. So Carol and I will continue to speak, but there might be, given what you said too, that's how we were looking at it. We think it might be able to fit appropriately in one of those topics.
Yeah, I do want to add that I have no interest in repeating, history on that. And I also want to note that the time that occurred was during the pandemic. And we were one of 8 middle schools that opened full-time on Long Island. And it was very unusual circumstances where, because we chose to open, that it left opportunities that may not have otherwise existed. So in terms of climate, I really think, you're taking a snapshot. I do really object to the terminology, the climate of the middle school. I think there were really, it was an unusual, hopefully a time that will not be repeated moment in history.
I did want to just say, I think out of the pandemic and the specific nature of schooling and structures in that period, even at the elementary level, we saw patterns that were abnormal. Nevertheless, I think in all of the schools, we've learned lessons from that discussion. And I just want to take a moment to give a shout out to Mr. Nelson and Dr. O'Hara at the middle school, who have done some great work on school rules, and they've changed supervision up. And with the addition, they need some supervision in new areas. But they've done a great job, even just walking through. Jamie and I did a visual inspection today of all the buildings, and just looking at the middle school signage. And we are reflecting on it, also acknowledging the specific nature of those last 2 years, but also continuing to think about that like we would, normally.
I don't know, there were definitely good processes that came out of there and good training out of that report. Yes, I think that was definitely a positive out of that report. I just don't want to, there was how we. I just want things to be viewed in the proper context of,
No, I don't-
when the
Yeah.
events occurred, and kudos to our teachers that worked under very difficult circumstances and came
No.
to school every day.
Yeah, I'm not interested in rehashing that, but I do also want to note that we had a presentation from the Weave Together group years before the pandemic. So I do have another new business item.
Just address
Yeah.
this one real quick. I think
Yeah.
we covered it well. I think we're on this. I think we know where we're going with this. I just think it's important to reiterate or expand upon what Chris said. The administration at the middle school is doing a great job. The faculty at the middle school are doing a terrific job. Forget about like the actual physical space that has seen such a transformation. But the faculty, the staff, the nurses in that building, I think our middle school is really firing on all cylinders. And doesn't mean we don't look at things. We're always doing continuous improvement. But certainly, it's not the position of this board in any way that building is anything other than a big success. It's really, really great things going on there, and we owe it to the personnel who work in that building that I think it's important to explicitly recognize and thank. Not at the expense of the other 4 buildings, who are also terrific, but this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about right now. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Andrea.
Well, thank you for saying that. There was also a new law passed, I guess, on virtual board meetings, that we can pass a resolution that we can have, if someone's absent for a good reason, and there's certain ones that are specified by Hochul, that we can be virtual. That one person can be virtual so that we don't have to miss a meeting. So I was sort of curious whether that's something that we can consider going forward. Unless you don't want it. I mean,
I'm like smirking because I was like thinking that Elliot's big job tonight would be to get my computer going again, and now he's.
I'm looking at Elliot's face.
I know.
Okay, so you'll
Yeah,
look
I'll
at
put
that.
that in backup. I think everyone has seen it, but I'll put it in the backup, and we can perhaps talk about an old business next.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm referencing Elliot Kay, our Director of Technology, who does an amazing job to get these things going. Thank you, Elliot. As long as I'm talking, I have 2 pieces of old business. These are just to bookmark, not answer or address right now. Number 1 is we had talked about in board meeting topics, the November 10th discussion of budget priorities and revenue challenges. We would be sure to include a discussion of the potential savings within this year's budget. We're very much in this year, so I'm hoping that is certainly happening every day with every expenditure in every place, because that will result in making it easier to cut next year's budget. It will make it easier to fund a potential capital reserve. And I think it's always a good process to go through as well. So that's all. I don't need a response or anything on that. If you're
Underspend the budget is said very often in central office. I just
Okay.
want to say.
great.
It's going to buy you a plaque.
Exactly.
The office.
And the second is just a straightforward request. We had talked toward the end of last year about international trips and the status of them. We're already hearing buzz about exciting international trips potentially for this year. I just want to get a report at the next meeting, if I could, very briefly, even if it's just in your report, on where we are with the status of international trips for 22-23.
Real quick, there are some proposals that are starting to come through. Actually, Mr. Contreras and I are meeting next week, hoping to meet next week and start to talk. So I'll have that ready for you next time.
Great. Thank you. Other old business? Any new business? To adjourn. All in favor? Oh, sorry. Heard a second, we're ready to go. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. And thank